Good morning. We have Dr. Rachel Walker with us today. Dr. Walker is a plastic surgeon in Dallas. We know each other from many years ago, training at the same program. She was a couple years ahead of me. Rachel, why don't you introduce us, tell us a little bit about your practice, and then we'll hop into some questions.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. I am a plastic surgeon in practice, private practice in Dallas, Texas. I trained in Missouri with you, as you know, and then I chose to do an additional year in fellowship after my residency in aesthetic plastics, and I did that with a private practice in Shreveport, Louisiana.
And tell us about your practice today, kind of how that whole transition occurred. You're probably one of the only people I know that had a successful purchase of another practice. So go into as much detail as you want and tell us about how you found that practice, like at what point in residency or fellowship you met that person, how the purchase went, all of it.
It was something that I never anticipated. Honestly, going into residency, I was pretty confident I wanted to be a hand surgeon. I knew I liked all of plastic surgery, but I thought the hand was pretty interesting. But then the more exposure I got to aesthetics, I realized it really just fit my mindset and my skill set. But coming out of residency, I never in a million years thought I'd own my own practice, but I thought I wanted to be in private practice. I thought I wanted to join somebody and be outside of the hospital. So I went to fellowship and I was like, oh, I hope I learned something meaningful about business and fellowship. And happily I did. So I spent a year in Shreveport, learned a whole lot of awesome surgical techniques, but also saw how a really great business could be run. I was like, maybe I could do this. But I still, even a couple months into fellowship, I did not plan on starting my own business. But as I looked what was out there, I kind of got nervous. Like, what if I joined somebody and I hated it? Or what if I joined somebody and I couldn't treat patients as I wanted to treat them? So I was like, oh, I've done a lot of hard things in life. I made it through med school, I made it through a surgical residency. Maybe I could just start my own thing. What's the worst that can happen? And in my mind, the worst that could happen, I was like, I'm a good surgeon. I was trained well. So bankruptcy is the worst thing that could happen. So why not bet on myself? So I started looking in Dallas and started looking at real estate. And that was a lot harder than I thought it would be. I'd never once looked at commercial real estate. And so I'm going out with a realtor who knew I wanted something medical. We're going to all these high rises that didn't have parking. And the next door neighbor is maybe a bankruptcy attorney or something not medical. And all I could think about is where does this leave me? Like, am I going to not be able to park after I operate and have to go back to my clinic? Are my patients going to be able to park? And then plumbing was a whole nother thing. There's all these beautiful spaces in Dallas, but they don't have sinks. And I want a sink in each room. And then you talk to the landlord, like, how do I put a sink in? And you have to get the approval of the people underneath you to put the sink in, or just be told where your sinks can go, which kind of made me sad. So I started looking at dental offices because all dentists have sinks. So I was looking for dental offices for sale and hair salons because they also have sinks. And I stumbled across a medical practice for sale. And it didn't say anything. It just said medical practice, 5,000 square feet, contact for more information. So I contacted, signed some non-disclosure agreement, get some vague description of where the location is. And they're like, we'll send you the formal address an hour before the meeting. I was like, oh, this sounds very suspect. So I'm all ready to go see this office, and I'm in North Dallas, close to the location. I get the address and I pull up to what is now my practice, Plastic Surgery Center of Dallas. And it was actually a very cool moment for me because when I interviewed for my fellowship, fifth year of residency out of six, I had driven from Dallas to Shreveport and I passed this practice. And I saw it because you can see it from one of the main interstates. I was like, that guy must be really cool to have such an awesome practice that basically it's a billboard in the middle of Dallas. Like, I wonder who he is. And I looked him up and it was Dr. Stagnoni. And I just kind of forgot about it until I pulled up to the practice and got to meet him in person. So the first time I ever met him was when I accidentally found him through trying to find a dentist office.
And then keep going from there. You walk in the building. By the way, I got chills when you were telling the story about how like serendipitous life is sometimes.
Yes.
But tell us like your first interaction with him. Talk about how you guys decided on, you don't have to disclose the price, but how did you guys come to an agreement of him leaving and you starting?
So he came in and he'd had the practice on the market for a while, and he was looking for somebody to kind of carry on the legacy of Plastic Surgery Center of Dallas, which uh, also serendipitously, he had purchased Plastic Surgery Center of Dallas from one of his mentors. So it's kind of been a lineage of Plastic Surgery Center of Dallas. So he wanted somebody who really wanted to take off running, do aesthetics only, and carry on the legacy of like safe, good surgery for people and taking great care of patients. So he also knew my fellowship mentor and knew kind of where I was coming from. They're not good friends, but they did some of their office planning. My fellowship mentor came and visited this office to lay out their office. And I walked through, I was like, this is everything I want and more. It has room for me to expand. It has an OR. It has a really nice flow in terms of like where the office is, where the clinic rooms are, where the OR is. I was like, I could not build this out better or faster. Um, so I was like, this is great. And he had a price in his mind, and it just blew my mind because all I had was a pile of debt and honestly, probably $6,000 in my residency 401k. And so then I was really intimidated because I was like, I need this. I want this. This is exactly what I want. And I will take this risk, but I didn't think any bank would say yes. The additional component of purchasing the practice was with a buying agreement for the real estate. So that was exactly what he wanted. Multiple established plastic surgeons in town had tried to just buy the building, and he wasn't willing to do that. So he was pretty dogged. And I'm selling my practice, and then you can rent from me for 18 months, and then you can buy the building. So we negotiated on that back and forth. I started working with a banker, and happily and shockingly, they were very willing to give me money based off of my business plan combined with historic financials from the practice I was purchasing. So financially, it actually was easier to do than I thought, even though it was a very, very, very big number at the end of the day and the debt I was taking on to do this on my own. But it was worth it. And I'm really happy I did
Yeah, who better to bet on than yourself?
it.
Talk about the transition with the staff. Did you keep anybody that he had been working with? And then also talk about kind of the transition for the patients.
So I think we had a pretty non-traditional transition. So I started November 1, he left December 26th and like bye and went to the Maldives for a month. And when I came in, he was really winding down his practice. He had found exactly what he wanted. He was doing the surgeries he wanted. He wasn't too worried about being super busy. He had a wonderful front office coordinator. Her name's Laura. And when I started, she was 7 months pregnant. And so I retained Laura. And then his wife was his practice manager slash patient coordinator. And she was like, I'm not staying. And that was pre-negotiated. So I looked at Laura. I was like, we're going to make this work in the 2 months you have before you go to maternity leave. Happily, he also had a contracted anesthesia. So I did not have to worry about anesthesia. And I did know that anesthesia knew my facility, knew aesthetics and that kind of patient. So that was helpful. And then he had 3 or 4 PRN OR team members that stayed on with me, but it was also really nice that they were PRN and could work at the hospital as well. When I wasn't busy, I didn't feel terrible for not giving them the same hours Dr. Stagnoni was able to give them. So, like I said, I kept Laura a month in. I hired 2 additional people so that when she went on maternity leave, I would have somebody. And that's about it.
And what about the patients? Was there kind of an announcement that he was transitioning out of the business and that kind of an introduction to you?
Yes, so legally, a physician has to tell their patients they're retiring. So he actually let me write the letter, which was helpful because I knew more about myself and how I would want to be endorsed. So, of course, it was like, oh, Dr. Stagnoni is retiring, and then we want to welcome me into the practice. And that was useful. It was useful, one, for his post-op patients. I was seeing his post-op patients and very happy to, because I didn't have any other business. But it was also really useful when those patients called. Maybe they were calling for some other reason, but they vaguely remembered that letter that said Dr. Rachel Walker will be taking over. So it wasn't a huge shock when they called the phone number. But I will say, in my opinion, there is more goodwill in purchasing a practice if you purchase from an ethical surgeon who treated patients well and had great surgical outcomes, which Dr. Stagnoni did. So there was value in this location. I mean, people are like, oh, I came here and I know Plastic Surgery Center of Dallas. I'm familiar with it. Particularly people who are driving in from 2 and 3 hours away. They like that we have parking. They like that it's all in one set, like little section. You're not going into a hospital, and they like that their records are here. So even if it's as simple as something like an implant exchange, I can look it up and know exactly what Dr. Stagnoni did for them. And once they got into the door, it was up to me to treat them well and to win them over, which I have a great team. So that was a pretty easy thing for us because we really focus on that patient care.
So starting with one employee, and then you mentioned growing two more, and then
Yes.
today you have a really big team. How
Yes,
long
I
have
have 14.
so how long have you been open now? And talk a little bit about the team that you have today. And you're still the only physician, correct?
Correct, correct. So started November 2019, did the whole COVID thing, which wasn't exciting as a new business owner, especially since I had never paid myself yet. So PPP loan wasn't a real thing for me because I only had two hourly employees on my payroll at that time. Then just really focused on how can we provide patients the best experience. And honestly, it attracted patients, but more surprisingly to me, it also attracted providers. So I had people who wanted to work in that kind of environment. They didn't want to work in a factory or something that patients weren't put first, or they weren't given any autonomy. So I grew, and I've had injectors come in. I now have a full laser center, which that kind of surprised me. I've always been very interested in skin and laser, mostly because if I look at the sun, I get freckles. So selfish interest, I suppose. um, but I had a laser provider wanting to join my team, which meant I had to go all in. So I brought lasers on and then actually took over the 1,000 square feet in the building that wasn't owned by me at the time. And again, if you're going to risk it, you better grow it, I suppose. So now the laser center has, I guess, 4 employees. I mean, they're attached, but they function the separate space. And we have injectors, we have an esthetician, and a great admin team.
That's incredible. And how scary to hit kind of the whole COVID shutdown just a few months after taking over. Do you think in retrospect, the silver lining was perhaps allowing you to kind of settle into your new office, really hone in on exactly how you wanted to build your practice and your team? I mean, was there a silver lining at all in those few months where you were less clinically busy than you would otherwise have wanted to be?
Honestly, I think the biggest silver lining was, and I'm an optimist, but one of my life mantras is life is pain. And I really am a happy, optimistic person. But when that happened, that was rough and I was scared. I didn't want to lose everything I just put in. And I really had this vision. I had exactly everything I wanted, and I could see it slipping through my fingers if I didn't do something meaningful with it. So I really did use that time during COVID. I came to the office every single day. I tried to figure out how to grow skincare, things I could do when I wasn't allowed to operate, and really button up the back end of the office that I knew nothing about because you don't get business training in residency. So I spent a lot of time doing that, but I do think that has colored some of my other hard experiences in business. I'm like, well, at least I can operate. At least I am doing the business I want. And then fast forward a year, the entire office flooded, all 5,000 square feet flooded through the ceiling. I had to do an entire office remodel, which I remodeled right when I moved in. So I started a remodel January, finished the remodel a day before we got shut down for COVID. And then a year later, I had to do the remodel again, which happily I knew all the contractors, but still, I mean, I shut down 3 weeks for mold remediation from all the water coming through my walls. Had to replace all 5,000 square feet of my 11-month-old floors and most of my cabinets, which was fine. It was another challenge that, again, puts things in perspective when smaller things go wrong. And it was also really nice to see that you can still provide a great customer experience if you have great team members and if you're just still focusing on the customer. I mean, I had poor patients coming in through paint drapes, walking down a hall in the back, and because we were trying to just remodel office section at a time. And at one point, I remember seeing this wonderful patient for a mommy makeover, and there's a hole in my wall because the only other room was being used at the time. And I was like, I'm so sorry, this room is still under construction. There's just this giant hole and a sink on the floor. And I mean, there was a place for her to sit, a place for me to sit, and we talked and kind of joked about the flooding. And patients are actually really understanding as long as you're still taking great care of them.
Yeah, it's amazing how tolerant staff and patients can be.
Oh, yes. Yes. I know. My team, I have one team member, she's been through it twice, and she has really stuck through it.
So tell us today what you talked a little bit about the laser center. Tell us more about your surgical practice, what your favorite procedures are, what areas you want to grow, looking forward into the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. My surgical practice, I do a lot of breast, a lot of revision breast, and a lot of mommy makeovers. I'm very well trained in liposuction, so a lot of my procedures do also involve liposuction. And it's not because I love liposuction at all, honestly. It's because liposuction can really take the results to the next level in terms of framing an entire body and just getting patients the results they want. And I find that as a female, I have really thrived in the breast and body space because I think females are a little more willing to be honest with me about their concerns or talk about how some clothes fit or don't fit or some of their identity of being female. And I think they feel a little more comfortable talking to me about that. I also do a lot of eyelids. That's really the only thing I do on the face. I don't do rhinoplasty. I occasionally do facelifts, but most of the time I have colleagues in town that if they're a better candidate for a colleague, I'm going to send them to my colleague. Eyelids I do really like, and oftentimes that's combined with laser. So patients who aren't going to get that facelift and don't don't really want surgical face rejuvenation, but they want a really aggressive laser, and they're like, but I also have my eye makeup on my eyelids. So just kind of an interesting other busy part of my practice. In terms of 5, 10 year goals, I would really love to have a second location at the end of the day with another surgeon or medical provider. I think something that I've been passionate about in growing this business is growing my team and growing a culture. So I want to be a place that you know how you're going to be treated. And that's one of the reasons I've expanded is I mean, hydrofacial is a hydrofacial, and I think the person behind the hydrofacial matters most, your esthetician. And my esthetician's lovely, and she treats patients great, and patients leave here feeling rejuvenated. And I'd rather them come to a place where they know that they're going to be cared about. We know that they have kids or they just went to Italy and have their hydrofacial here rather than maybe like a corporate owned place down the street where it's a 30-minute hydrofacial. No one really cares about if it's done right or cares about the person's goals. So I really love that everyone on my team cares about the goals of the patient. I care about my team members. I want Madison, who's been with me since December 2019. I want her to grow. She's this wonderful, wonderful woman who is wise beyond her years. I hired her when she was 19, and I want her to grow in her business life. I want her to be able to manage multiple locations and really take that to the next level because a lot of her strengths are my weaknesses. And it's fun to see people reach their goals and still treat people right. So not fast business, just focus on treating each other well, creating a culture, treating the patients well. So as we expand, I'd like to do that. And does that mean another plastic surgeon? I'm not sure. It might be facial plastics, it might be dermatology, or it might be a whole bunch of really awesome surgeons who don't want to work full time. They don't want to spend their life running a business, and they don't want to be in a hospital where they may or may not be respected. And so trying to create that culture of, like, I don't know, I was clearly not in medicine 50 years ago, but where doctors only had to focus on taking care of their patients, and patients trusted their doctors because it was just a more pure relationship. There wasn't all the in between of a lot of medicine that we see now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And I think I joke with patients that I fell in love with a field that affords me the ability to not work at a hospital and not go through insurance. And I
Right.
think it sounds like I have a lot of the same kind of goals as you in terms of taking care of the patient and taking care of your staff. Um, who do you lean on in terms of professional development when you get business questions? Early on, you mentioned that you didn't have a ton of business training with residency, or, you did get some in fellowship, but how did you teach yourself some of the business components and initially, and then today, how do you push yourself to the next level business wise?
So, business, again, I had zero, like, I don't think I've ever even taken a finance or econ class. So, I mean, science all the way, straight to med school. Never thought I'd run my own business. But I did do a lot of leadership training in college, and I think business and leadership go hand in hand. I honestly started out listening to a lot of podcasts. So, employee development, leading your team, growth, even marketing podcasts, just to kind of learn the lingo and try to take things in as quickly as possible. And that's something that I could double time. I could be walking for, exercise and listening to a podcast at the same time. I bought QuickBooks for Dummies, which, I mean, it's still actually sitting on my bookshelf because I look at it and I laugh because I didn't even know how to. The first time I ran payroll, I'm like Googling how to take payroll taxes out because at that time I was writing payroll checks for Laura just on a check. And Dr. Stagnoni actually had a bookkeeper who did all of his stuff on a typewriter for all the years, and he just kept her around because worked for him for over 20 years. So that wasn't a good business plan for me. So I needed to learn how to do that on my own. I have been very blessed by coming across some great mentors. I've been very shocked how collaborative, particularly private practice physicians, are with each other. So, happily, my mentors, Dr. Wall and Dr. Wall, they have run a great business for all of time. So, they are my first go to, but I've met other people through them to ask questions. And it's been very helpful to have people when you think the sky is falling to call and they're like, oh, that happened to me twice last week. And you're like, oh, I'm not alone. And I will say, weirdly, my little sister is also a very good source of advice. She works for Amazon, like corporate Amazon, and they have all their like Amazonian tenants, and she has to deal with a lot of HR and like tough conversations. So when I have those, it's actually kind of nice to have someone who is thoroughly corporate kind of run me through how they would do it. And then maybe I soften it up just a little bit, but that's her entire career is managing a team, leading people, and putting people through performance improvement plans or promotion plans or giving that tough feedback. Whereas I feel like in residency, like maybe you got like a retractor thrown at you and we're like, be better and try harder, sleep less. And so we don't see that as much. So I've tried to also outsource different, like I would say a lot of the podcasts I listen to aren't medical. They're more business and like corporate development or entrepreneurship podcasts. And I think that's helped me a lot. But happily, I do have a great group of predominantly female surgeons that I talk to. And now two of my good friends from residency actually have their own practice. So it's kind of nice to talk with them about their challenges, what they have found has worked and not worked.
What have you found in terms of marketing that's really worked well for your office?
I would say for me, the biggest return on investment has been social media. And I deeply hate social media for the most part. I like to post pictures of food and dogs and cats. That's really where I roamed prior to doing my marketing on social media. But I do think um, putting that effort in is worth it. I think I hired a company called Social Practice to help me with my marketing, and they really encouraged me to just be me on social media and talk more and fuss less about it. And that has helped so much because patients come in and they feel like they know me. They feel like they know my team. Or I'll say something in the consult and I'm like, oh my gosh, I heard that in a video. And I was like, well, that's because I believe it. And so they're a little more prepared. So not only just from a revenue perspective, it's also patient education. I feel like my patients have heard it more than once. They're more likely to remember it, or they're going to be a little more at peace during the recovery process because I tell them that it's a slow ride. And I talk about that a lot on social media about how sometimes you have to be a little ugly duckling before you bloom into your swan. And it's nice for them to hear it several times or be able to go back. It's also nice. I don't know. I almost think it's patients can be like, oh, I don't think I'll get along with her. And I would rather them not get along with me on Instagram and never come in than walk in and not like the kind of personality I am. Because I do think I'm a little different than a lot of the doctors surrounding me, and they're a little more serious and
Buttoned up.
yeah, buttoned up and just different. And if that's what you want, that's what you want. Like you're not going to make everybody happy, but I do love that the people who come in from particularly Instagram, they're looking for me and I'm looking for them.
Yeah, the self-selection is huge. And I remember I was interviewed by someone a couple years ago before I opened, and they were like, well, aren't you nervous about being so young? And I'm like, well, that's the great part about social media is like people know that this is
Mhm.
my first endeavor after fellowship. Like the people who are overly concerned about me being so young and straight out of training will never come in,
Yes.
which saves my time and saves their time. And they can go to the old guy down the street if they want.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about kind of hate to say work-life balance, but that's the phrase that we use. As the practice owner and the surgeon taking care of your staff and your patients, how do you manage kind of that constant pull?
hmm
How do you get away from work? What things have you found super helpful?
I think I hate the term work-life balance because I don't think it truly exists. And I also don't think like if you're passionate about work, you'll never work a day in your life because sometimes I'm like, I need to not be working. But I am passionate about what I do and I like it. I would rather spend a lot of my time working hard on something I deeply care about. Everyone jokes that this is my baby. I don't have children and I never wanted children even before I was a business owner. So it's not that I'm too busy to have them. It just wasn't on my life path. I'm a big dog cat person. I'll probably have a goat sometime. Um, but I think I have poured so much into this business and I get so much back from it. It's very easy for me to work long hours, but I do need a break and I'm very good at compartmentalizing. It is easy for me to get to work at 6 on a Monday and stay till 6 or 7 on a Monday and be okay with it. Maybe grab dinner with a friend. But I try to be very cognizant about breaking out time on the weekend. So spending less time thinking about work, period. Of course, I'm still responding to my patients, but having fun things to do or travel is a huge thing for me. So I'll try to get at some point each year, I'll look at my calendar and block several chunks of time for me to get away. I think it's also helped that our culture in the office is I don't bother people outside of office hours that work on my team. And they largely don't bother me unless it's an emergency, but I think they give me so much during the hours that they are here. And they love that I don't ask them if it's 5:01. I'm not messaging them about work. I might still be here, but I'll figure it out and maybe do one of those delayed send emails for the next morning so it's not in their mind. And I try to do the same thing with me. I batch out my time, work really, really hard, or maybe it's just a Thursday and I'm not going to be doing anything anyways. And I still have energy to work on my business, but I try not to ever work on my business on a Sunday. And I try not to ever work on my business when I'm on vacation.
Hmm. Yeah, compartmentalization is um, a great theory. Sometimes it's harder than it sounds.
Yes, in theory is correct. I mean, at the end of the day, the alarm goes off in the office. It's still coming to me, or the office floods. Guess what? It's coming to me.
Yeah,
And I mean,
hopefully,
there's always,
hopefully no more mold remediation in your future.
oh, I know. I have like one of my reps, he calls me Poseidon because I've had so many water problems. No,
Not a
it's not
good
a nickname you
nickname.
want.
A little bit on education. How do you keep up on current literature and things? Do you have kind of a pseudo journal club that you're a part of with other private practice physicians? Do you go to meetings? Do you watch other surgeons? And then the other part of that question is, do you ever see yourself starting a fellowship?
Yes, to all the things. So I am huge on meetings. I love meetings. I think I love them for a couple of reasons. One, to stay on top of new techniques, but you also get the opportunity to network and talk with those same surgeons that maybe you've looked up to your entire life and you want to learn more about their technique. And maybe that does open the door to go visit them and talk to them about their techniques and see their techniques firsthand. But for me, I learn best with a combination of auditory and visual. So meetings are great for me. And then I'll write down the paper links and go back through them. But if I've heard it before, that's a little better. Happily, since I do have my own OR, I have a it's quad A OR. So I have my quad A group that I meet with quarterly, and we'll also run through like kind of tough cases together, which I think is super useful. And like I said, I have a great network of female surgeons around me. And so if I have a challenging case, I like to run it by them. And happily, I get the same back from my peers and they'll ask me something. And I think that's very useful. But I do think continuing education is invaluable. I mean, the first 6 years of being a plastic surgeon in residency, I did breast reductions and breast lifts one way. And then I went to fellowship and found a better way. And I have never gone back to the way I did it for 6 years. And uh and I've learned other ways since then too. But I mean, I think as you become more advanced in your surgical career, you're a little able to more able to try things just based on different patient needs. I mean, I think I have used my residency technique a few times on a patient it was just more suited for, but it's so fun to learn new things or fun to learn things that make the patient experience better or downtime less or just that really tough patient. I mean, I don't want to be the first person to try it on somebody, so I'd rather talk to somebody who's done it before. Regarding a fellowship, I would love to have a fellowship. I think I have been tremendously blessed to have had mentors that have cared deeply about the people they're training. Even in residency, they were male mentors, but they believed the chair of the department believed deeply in female surgeons and that they could be just as awesome as male surgeons, even though he's like a 70 mid early 70s older gentleman who when he trained there weren't women plastic surgeons running around, but he put as much effort into me as he would have anyone else and really believed in who I was. And then I went to fellowship and met the most wonderful female surgeon of all time, Dr. Holly Wall. And she was exactly the kind of surgeon I wanted to be, still soft, happy, but surgically tremendous and a great wife, a great friend, had a vibrant travel life. And her husband, also Dr. Wall, Dr. Simeon Wall, he helped me so much. He's this huge business mind and is great at giving feedback and doesn't like to sugarcoat things. I was like, well, Rachel, you're gonna have to try harder if you want to do this. And also just technically excellent, but still showed me that you could run this really awesome practice and still do fun things. And if you run the practice the way you want, you're probably going to be happy, even though the rest of the world might think your work-life balance is a little off kilter. Maybe you're just hanging out with the wrong kind of people.
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to ask you a question about kind of your upbringing. You mentioned that you're generally a positive person. You know, life is pain was another thing you said, and you seem to have quite the grit. You know, some people would look at these big setbacks and crumble, whereas you said, you know what? I'm Poseidon. I'm going to take this on and I'm going to make it work. What in your upbringing gave you that grit, do you think?
I have awesome parents. They gave me like all the opportunities in the world. They worked so hard. Both my parents worked growing up, and they spent all of their money putting their kids first. So our education mattered most. So we went to private school, we were on scholarship, but they still spent all of their money putting us into school and making sure we had the opportunities that we had. And I think as there's I have a brother and a sister, we all knew that it was kind of like ours to screw up. Like they gave us everything. My parents are smart. Like they could help us if we didn't understand something. And the three kids, we all learn very differently. Like I'm probably the least traditionally book smart out of my siblings, but I was really passionate about understanding things holistically. And I think that can be very valuable. And it can also be really great when you're communicating with patients because you can learn to translate a really complex topic into something more simple. But I think my parents also kind of expected excellence out of us. They're like, you have the tools, you better go do something with it. And always supported what we wanted to do. I don't think my mom actually even wanted me to be a doctor. She believed that I could be a doctor, but would like me to have like a less stressful career, but has been excited watching me do the things I can do. And I think just the lanes they put us in, we weren't always like the outsider wouldn't have expected us to succeed, yet we did. So it was kind of like, well, you just keep trying. Like you should at least try to climb the mountain. If you fall down, like keep climbing it. I mean, again, you should probably bet on yourself. And if you're not willing to, maybe take a break and then try again. But I think they never really coddled us in any way. If we failed at something, they're like, we'll do better next time.
Sounds a lot like what your fellowship mentors would tell you.
Yeah.
Are there any words of wisdom you would impart on listeners, whether it's the younger surgeon in residency who's thinking about opening their own practice, or a nurse injector who's running their business and looking to grow?
Yeah. I think you can do it if you're passionate about it. I cannot tell you how many people told me not to do this or told me to start small. They're like, don't have a bathroom, don't have a kitchen. I mean, I have a kitchen and I have 4 bathrooms and I love having 4 bathrooms. And don't buy devices, which I bought devices because I found someone who was worth buying devices for. And I believed in our success as a team. And I believed in the future of what we could create with that. And so I think don't be limited by other people's belief would maybe be the take home message, because your belief might be different. And that is what's going to make you successful, just because somebody else can't see it the same way that you see it. I also think that everybody has done harder things. I mean, if you've learned to reconstruct a multi-level facial fracture in somebody, you can probably figure out how to do some of these weird tax business things or make a business plan. I mean, it just takes some work, and it might be work that's a little harder to do because you're not as innately passionate about like learning to the back ends of QuickBooks or some tax law, but you need to do it to get there, and it's not going to take you as long as you think. And I think another thing is don't be paralyzed by indecision just because you don't know what you don't know. You're going to learn what you don't know. You're going to think you know all the things too. So even if you have prepared, all of a sudden you're going to be like, oops, didn't know that. And that's another lesson learned. And next time you won't make that same mistake. But you need to not be afraid of failure. I know that's cliche, but you're going to learn so much more from your failures. And you're only going to fail if you're trying something new. So just continuing on and being really focused on your vision and your passion, what you want to create, and reassess it. You can't just start your business and be like, oh, I started, I'm successful, and never go re-inspect what everyone's doing, what your business is doing, or be inflexible just because something worked last year doesn't mean it's going to work this year. Like you need to listen to your team's feedback. And but I think just checking in with yourself and making sure you're going the right route. But if we're talking early residents, new people wanting to run their business, just don't listen to other people telling you you can't, or the market's saturated. I mean, Dallas, probably in the square mile around me, there's probably 10 plastic surgeons, and they've been here forever, and they're friendly, and it's great. I like it if If they need to borrow fluids from me or suture, I'll lend it to them. And same for me. It's really nice, but I have a different business than they have. I attract a different patient than they do. And there's enough pieces of the pie for everyone at the end of the day, as long as you're clear in your vision and you're focused on what you want to create.
Yeah, as one of my favorite podcasters says, there's enough sunshine to go around for everybody.
Yes, yes.
Well, I want to thank you for a few things. I want to thank you for today being on the podcast. I want to thank you in residency for serving as a role model for me as an older, badass female surgeon. And then I want to thank you for a few years ago when you helped me kind of get my surgery center up off the ground. You were super helpful in terms of all the little nitty-gritty questions I asked you. Um, so this is Dr. Rachel Walker at the Plastic Surgery Center of Dallas. Dr. Walker, where can people find you if they're interested?
Instagram is probably the easiest. It's at Rachel Walker MD. I do have social media people, but I'm largely answering my own messages, so I will see them, and that's probably the quickest way because my email inbox is a scary place that you do not want to live.